Please be seated. Well, this is my third sermon at Calvary, so I think it's about time to voice a controversial and divisive opinion from the pulpit. It may actually not be very divisive. Since I'm probably the only one in the room who holds this particular opinion, it might actually be quite unifying for the rest of you. Maybe we'll see soon. Anyway, as I drive around Memphis, trying to learn the street names and the shortcuts, slowly weaning myself from that little blue GPS dot on my phone, I've noticed something. The streets here seem to be marked up with striping paint, delineating the bike paths and the turning lanes and the road shoulders, just like any other city, right? And Memphians generally abide by these markings, with one major exception: crosswalks. Surely I'm not the only one who's noticed that crosswalks seem to be almost uniformly ignored in this city. People just wander out into the street wherever and whenever they get a hankering to do so. Earlier in the week, I was at a stoplight on Poplar, and in this case, a guy happened to be close to a crosswalk when he stepped into the street, but I'm pretty sure that was just a coincidence, because as soon as he stepped in there, he bore left and crossed the 7 lanes of traffic at a 45-degree angle, ending up about halfway through the next block. To his credit, he did not walk across the hoods of the parked cars, but he didn't seem to be in any great hurry. Why not just use the crosswalk, right? Well, I was still pondering this great mystery on my way home Friday afternoon, after having just dodged 3 pedestrian nomads after turning onto North Parkway from Danny Thomas. And in my pondering, I decided that I actually kind of like the flow of people out into the streets here. That's the controversial opinion, by the way. I don't think the Visitors Bureau lists jaywalking among the city's attractions, but maybe it should. Well, apparently I was contemplating this mystery very, very deeply, because I looked up and I found myself driving past the zoo, which is 3 blocks beyond the turn for our street. I am still learning my way around, but I do know the street that I live on. I guess I'd just gotten disconnected again from the world outside my head. So you might say jaywalkers help me keep awake. And I'm kind of grateful for that. I need all the help I can get sometimes. So maybe it was that reminder of how much time I spend oblivious to the moment at hand that made the sleepiness of the disciples at the Transfiguration stand out this time when I read it. I mean, really? They were sleepy? As Jesus prayed, his face changed and his clothes became dazzling white. Then Moses and Elijah appeared, talking to the dazzling white-robed Jesus with the shining face. And Peter and his companions, we're told, were sleepy. Their strange grogginess reminds us of a scene later in Luke. Remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? He asks that the cup of his death be taken away, and an angel visits him to give him strength, and his prayers become so intense that sweat becomes like great drops of blood, and when he looks up, he finds his disciples asleep. What is with these guys who keep nodding off right when something important is about to happen? Or has it always actually been a little bit hard to actually stay awake to our lives, even to the presence of God that's shining or bleeding right there in front of us? The Transfiguration happens in this section of Luke in which Peter seems to be a little bit off his game, right? Or at least Jesus keeps responding to him that way. Earlier in today's chapter, Jesus is again praying with his disciples nearby, and he asks them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They answer, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others an ancient prophet." And then Jesus asks, "But who do you say that I am?" And it's Peter, of course, who pipes up the answer, "The Messiah of God." Now, that's the right answer, by the way. But instead of congratulating him, Jesus says, "Don't tell that to anyone, Peter. People who want to save their life are going to lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake will save it." He says, what good is it to gain the whole world but lose yourself? So even when you speak what seems like the simple truth at the center of the whole story, Jesus won't let you be satisfied. It's as if the truth about him is never something that can just be spoken out loud and settled for good. Keep awake seems to be a persistent undercurrent in Jesus' responses to us. 8 days later, the Transfiguration happens. And again, it's Peter, sleepy but awake enough to see what's going on, and he just can't help himself. He says, "Master, it's good for us to be here. Let's make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah," which is followed in the text by Luke's damning little commentary, not knowing what he said. Poor Peter. Peter's that guy, you know him, who spoils the moment, saying, "Oh, this is so cool. Everybody stand right where you are. I need to make a Facebook post." Maybe he would have been better off just taking that nap. It's easy to beat up on the disciples, though, to roll our eyes and wonder how they could be so dense at the remove of all these years. I'm beginning to wonder whether Jesus was countering their sleepy ways with a little, let's call it jaywalking. Over and over again, he wanders across their orderly, all figured out lives, and he makes them stop and look up and pay attention. Even when somebody blurts out, "You're the Messiah," he stops him. He won't let them feel like they've settled the matter for good. He won't let anybody build a tidy little structure around his identity or around their own lives. Jesus insists that we stay awake to the sacredness of the moment we're living in right here and now. The Transfiguration is actually a wonderful way into the importance of simple, sacred attention, because there's really nothing to do in response to that blinding flash of divine glory, is there? Just don't go to sleep, the story seems to tell us. And don't start building shrines or monuments. There's nothing to do, not right away at least. Just be present to God. Just be in awe. Sometimes it seems like we in the church have divvied up this Christian life into being and doing. And so the doing kind of Christians, whether they're evangelists or social justice types, the doers accuse the beers of useless navel-gazing, and the beers accuse the doers of being shallow, guilt-ridden busybodies. But Jesus doesn't seem to make the distinctions we do, does he? Keep awake, he tells us, throughout his ministry. Keep awake. Whether it's to a Samaritan beat up and left for dead on the road, or to the children everyone else is ignoring, or to a prophet in shining clothes, or even to the present moment of your own life that you've lost touch with again in your worries about tomorrow. Jesus tells us to be awake to whatever God has put before us in this moment. Awake like virgins with their lamps trimmed and filled with oil. Keep awake. He seems to think that if we are truly open and awake to the present moment, we won't be able to stand by when action's called for. If we're truly open and awake to the present moment, we will be able to stay still when silence is what's called for. The Holy Spirit will tell us what to say when the time comes. Don't worry about that now, he says off in another part of the story. So think about the sacred moments when you've been startled awake. If not by a jaywalker or a prophet in a shining robe, maybe by the birth of a child or a stranger's small act of kindness, or maybe by the bread and wine you've noticed that you've received 1,000 times, but suddenly seem brilliantly alive one Sunday morning. Or maybe you're startled awake by the fear you see in the eyes of a child of immigrants about to head off to school for the first day. Or maybe one day it's a bona fide Memphis jaywalker. As you suddenly stop and wonder what it really must be like to make your way through this town every day on foot because you can't afford to travel any other way. Whether it's to the shining glory of God or the pain of the world, or the simple gift of this moment of your life, isn't a wakefulness, isn't an honest openness to, an awareness of what's happening right now, that which Jesus calls us all to today. Calvary's 185 years old today. This building's only about 12 years younger than that. You and I have inherited a great legacy of faithfulness, of prayer, of action on behalf of the vulnerable in this city from our forebears here. There's so much to celebrate of Calvary Church Memphis, which is so very, very much well and alive in the summer of 2017. But to be faithful in a deeper way to the lives of the Christians who came before us, it's not enough to be satisfied with the handsome dwelling St. Peter's descendants consecrated here way back when. To be faithful to them and to Jesus, their stories have to become entries into the present moment of our own. I'm convinced that that's why he keeps stepping off in the curb and into the traffic of our lives, to shake us out of our oblivious commutes and into our lives right here, in this very Memphis today. We can help each other keep awake. We really can if we see it as our sacred work as the body of Christ. There are all sorts of personalities here at Calvary who will call us back to the present in all sorts of different ways, some bluntly, some gently, some through bullhorns, some on elegant postcards. So I won't try to tell you just how to go about the good work of keeping awake. But what I will do is leave you with just how it happened once for a poet named Marie Howe. I had no idea the gate I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. He was a little taller than me, a young man but grown, himself by then, done at 28. Having folded every sheet, rinsed every glass he would ever rinse under the cold and running water. "This is what you have been waiting for," he used to say to me. And I'd say, "What?" And he'd say, "This," holding up my cheese and mustard sandwich. And I'd say, "What?" And he'd say, "This," sort of looking around. Maybe that's how it always works in our lives. We wonder and we wait for just what great or terrible things God might be calling us to. And so often through one another, Jesus keeps telling us this. Whatever moment we happen to be living, Jesus says, "I'm calling you into this one." He says this one, sort of looking around. Amen.